But that aspect of like, what do we do in recovering from crisis in our communities is so important. One thing, I feel like I'm going to assemble like a list of resources that hopefully one of the coordinating committee members can share with everybody. It's going to include a lot of stuff that comes from the Poor People's Campaign and what I use to create my presentation. But there's also another document that I appreciate very much, and it's called A People's Orientation to a Regenerative Economy. Basically trying to figure out how can we create a new economy to get us past the climate crisis and hopefully just like do life in a more sustainable way. And one element of this like policy platform was like implementing a just recovery and recognizing exactly what you said, that there are people who are just like disproportionately impacted before crisis hits, which makes them like just even worse off whenever it comes to recovering from crisis. And so we need to make sure that like we do have like a government that's creating policies that will actually work to meet the needs of the people who have been harmed prior to and after like natural disasters or any other kind of crisis hits our communities. And so thank you for raising that. Thank you very much. Let's see, could I hear from someone in group 13?
Okay, I guess I'm talking. I was in group where we were only 3 in group 13, okay? 1 from California, 2 from the East Coast. We mentioned much as Sue did, the fact that it's the poor who tend to be on the receiving end of all, well, in some ways, the disasters. In other words, they can't recuperate at all. And also the fact that the government, our government, tends to put things like pipelines and other take over areas where we have people, the native peoples, the Native Americans, and they have no say in this, and they will just walk over people's rights. You know, that doesn't happen where you have wealthy people. And the other thing, even in terms of the wildfires, because certainly California is terrible, you know, with the wildfires. And the poor people, most of them aren't losing their homes because they're not out in the hills where you have beautiful, beautiful trees and so forth. Now, it is a natural disaster. There's no two ways about it. But in terms of the number of homes and so forth that have been devastated, I mean, you know, we hear all about that, and we should, absolutely. But we don't hear about that when something happens in a poor area as much. And the hurricanes, you know, we hear about it mostly when the more wealthy areas are devastated. And the poor areas, we might hear about it, but it doesn't get a lot of coverage ongoingly. So, you know, we were talking about things like that. And yeah, the difficulties with the environmental degradation, if you will, which is everywhere, and then the injustice in terms of the way it's dealt with and the way it's communicated.
So thank you for sharing. You actually, you called into my mind something that I could have shared in response to Susan's comments as well. And talking about how, like, in the aftermath of disaster, like you see like the takeover of these communities by like other extractive or harmful industries. This is actually, there's a journalist who's really like prominent in the climate justice space. Her name's Naomi Klein. And she's written about what she calls the shock doctrine. And this is basically the idea that like a disaster might strike a community and, you know, people are very disoriented, don't know how to respond, don't know where to move. And so in the midst of this disorientation, you have like state actors that will then go ahead, like hollow out any sense of democratic process and really like just implement like their own vision on these communities. One prime example is actually New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And so like the government response to Hurricane Katrina was just ultimately horrible. It was basically non-existent. And you could say the same for Puerto Rico as well. And it happens because the communities that are impacted by these disasters, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Maria, were people of color. And that's why the state refuses to act. But they do help businesses go in and like try to privatize the electric grid in Puerto Rico. They did help the charter school industry go ahead and publicize the public school system in New Orleans. And so then therefore like setting up ways that these industries can continue to extract and profit off of our communities while doing nothing to help the poor dispossessed folks that live there and ultimately don't have the means on their own to recover from these crises. And so once again, like I just really appreciate what you all are pulling out in your discussions, because I'm thinking about like the response that these communities do get. It's also something that we need to really like sit in and wrestle with and think through, like how is it that we can like stop this like shock. She calls it like disaster capitalism from descending on our communities. And I think that even the response or lack thereof to the global pandemic that we find ourselves navigating is also, it would also fall under the umbrella of shock doctrine. And I think that there are a lot of things that are going to be remade in very undemocratic, hierarchical, and extractive ways that unless we are organized to be a sufficient counter, we won't be able to stop. And so thank you for sharing that, Barbara. Let's see. I think we have time for 2 more groups to get a report back. So I would say, how about group 15? Okay, I don't know. Maybe folks in group 15 don't remember that they were there. So I will try group 3.
Yes, I'm from group 3. Can you hear and see me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think a lot of things that have been said kind of came also from the group that I was in. I think our biggest takeout from these videos that we saw this morning were this whole thing of the poor, the suffering poor from climate change. One of the things that we talked about a lot of examples of in our different areas, St. Louis and Wichita and also California, where the poor are the ones who are helping to build the economy, but they go back home with very little. And one of the things I was just mentioning in particular was we even have a proposition on our ballot this year from Orange, California, and it's about development. We're going to develop this land and say yes, because we're going to develop this land. And it's coming from a Japanese company. And yet at the same time, the land is a former quarry and it's full of toxic waste, and they want to build 128 houses on this land. And they're saying that we're going to take away the quarry and build these beautiful homes and say yes to this, say yes to housing. And it's so deceitful when we realize that what is really there is toxic waste. So we were talking a lot too about politicians who don't even know what really the poor are going through. How many of our senators, our representatives, our legislators in the state really know every inch of their area and where the poor are? And do they actually live even near the poor? Do they know what toxic chemicals are? I mean, we even heard our president say, drink bleach. And maybe it was because he never had to clean from bleach before. Who knows what kind of cleaning he's ever had to do to know how toxic bleach is. So these are things that we have to realize who we're voting for and how important the voting is. And plus other things that you all mentioned too. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just will say on that last note too, this is about like, what do our policymakers know? And that's why I think like the way that the Poor People's Campaign like creates our demands and like tries to create policy proposals is just like really through like the shared experience of people who have been impacted by these issues. And so I think that like educating our politicians is like a huge component of the work that we need to be doing and something that people might forget. We're often, like we like, try to like put them in place to represent us, but sometimes they need help in knowing how best to represent us. And sometimes people aren't actually interested in representing the interests of all people. They're just more interested in being there for corporations like the fossil fuel industry. And that's a lot of people in Pennsylvania's legislature. But I think that like we shouldn't give up on that job, which is educating our people who are in office. And then if they refuse to listen still, then like we make plans to try to put somebody else there in their place. Let's see. The time we have left, let's see, if we could have, because I can wrap up so succinctly, I want to hear from one more group. Is group 5 available?
I'll speak quickly. We were only 3, and 2 were Joseph workers. So I was the old lady in the group. But we had a very interesting conversation, basically about white privilege. And we spent most of our time reflecting about, the fact that we have really had a very privileged experience ourselves. And then how do we take what our lives have been like and somehow that become able to enter into and to really engage with folks whose life experience has been very different. And I said to the 2 young women, the woman from Flint really spoke to me very deeply, because I've been aware that, Flint has had problems. And as she was speaking, and I was thinking about losing her babies and her daughter losing her child, that it's all become sort of like abstract and out there for me. Whereas for the people in Flint, it's still every day they're living. It's the way they're struggling, that they're having to face all of these issues day by day, the lack of water, having to go to the store. She doesn't have transportation. So that's really what we spent most of our time talking about from our own perspective, and just saying, how can we become more attuned to, sensitized to, aware of, and less complacent, and then move from talking a lot about it to doing something about it. And we agreed that the idea of the Federation working closely with the Poor People's Campaign would certainly, I think, be a very good thing for both entities. And that's pretty much where we ended.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And I do think that really resonates with me as a person who does organizing and environment and climate justice work. Where I am currently located, I'm not necessarily the person on like facing the direct impacts of all of these issues either, but like my job as an organizer is to connect with people who are, to hear the stories of folks who are, and then find the opportunities to amplify, uplift their stories, their voices, put them in spaces where they can connect with policymakers and those who are making the decisions that are ultimately like harming us and harming our people. And so that's the way that like we can do this work. And try to like mitigate our privilege, but also like supporting folks who need it most. And so I appreciate what you shared. I appreciate everybody for doing this report back with me. And now I'm going to take the next few minutes to close in the most rapid manner. And so first I'm going to pull up my presentation. And so, of course, like we did all this setup because I just genuinely believe, as a coordinating committee member for the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, that the Poor People's Campaign is a vehicle for creating this new unsettling force in the United States and even across the globe, and really like just unsettling all that we know is wrong with this world and with these policies that are harming poor and dispossessed folks, the 140 million poor and dispossessed folks in this nation. And so I'm calling on everyone in this call to really like get involved with your local state coordinating committee whenever it comes to the Poor People's Campaign. You can find out more about the Poor People's Campaign by going to our website, which is just www.poorpeoplescampaign.org. Right now, we are in the midst of our We Must Do More it's not a tour so much as it's just like our campaign for this moment. And it's really like rooted in getting out the vote in this big election. And so just here, this is like a screen capture from one of their websites. And it's just talking about the fact that like we know that poor people are suffering right now. And the Poor People's Campaign has put together a moral agenda and our own policy platform for what we know could be a correction to all the harms that poor people are facing today. So we are calling on more people to join our MORE movement. And this means more mobilizing, more organizing, more getting folks registered, and more getting people educated and ready to vote in this upcoming election. And there are so many ways that people can take action with us, both like virtually or in person. And so we have a series of phone banks that are running with all the state coordinating committees at this time. We have people committed to taking different pledges to commit to get people in their community to vote in this election. For folks who are able and, you know, don't have like the health risk, we're also calling on people to be poll monitors because we know that I don't know. There are just like lots of misinformation that is mobilizing people to the polls that might try to discourage others from voting. And so we want to be a good corrective for that. On our website, you can get connected to the state's coordinating committee page. If you click at the top, it says get involved, I believe. And so in this list, this map isn't really helpful, but I will share that the states that do not have coordinating committees currently are Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, North and South Dakota, and Wyoming. Every other state in the United States does have a coordinating committee right now. And these coordinating committees are actually just made up of many different organizations. And so the route to get involved with a coordinating committee could be your congregation being like a partner at this committee, or it could be getting plugged into the other organizations that are doing the work of the Poor People's Campaign, but then also building on their own like local issue organizing. And so once again, I encourage folks to find your state coordinating committee and get involved. And then lastly, the Poor People's Campaign has launched a series of Moral Mondays. They've been doing these virtual gatherings really since July or August. And this is all oriented around the federal government needing to put together like a stimulus package that will actually support poor, dispossessed working people in the United States. I mentioned it briefly yesterday, but you know, we've been able to inject trillions of dollars into Wall Street and bail out major corporations, but poor people only got one $1,200 stimulus check, and then people who were able, like luckily eligible for like unemployment. But like there just hasn't been any measures in place to make sure that like we're actually able to survive this pandemic moment. And so every Monday, the Poor People's Campaign has been doing like these virtual events where they're calling out the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell for sitting on these bills, for sitting on a stimulus package and like not doing his job to really support people in this critical time. And so if you're on Facebook in particular, that's the best way to get connected with the Moral Monday caravans and digital marches and find ways to plug in here. And so from phone banking to being engaged with the digital events, there are a lot of ways to get connected with the Poor People's Campaign. And I will share my contact information with the coordinators for this week's series. And so people can reach out to me if you're struggling to find your local campaign or you're struggling to find those local organizations, and I will do my part to really help you do that. But that really comes to the conclusion of my presentation. I'm sorry, because I feel like I took up a little too much time. But I just want to say thank you all for allowing me to have the space to share with you all from here, from all of you. I hope that it was really fruitful to discuss environmental justice, environmental racism, how the campaign can be a vehicle for doing this work in our communities. And I look forward to seeing you all getting involved with the local Poor People's campaigns in your states.
Brianne, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. As many on this call know, last year, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious recognized the interrelatedness of racism, migration, and the climate crisis. And when you and I presented last year at the Regional Assembly here in Pittsburgh, we broadened that interrelatedness to also include ecological devastation of all kinds, not just climate change. During these days, you're challenging this group to broaden it even more to recognize that the interrelatedness also includes poverty, inequality, the war economy, and militarism. There's no doubt that we're living in a time of great ecological devastation. And at the same time, many environmental organizations, both locally and nationally, are finally reckoning with a past and even a present that has included overt racism, xenophobia, and elitism. As those of us in Pittsburgh know, one of the major funders of the environmental movement locally is a foundation which also promotes policies that severely limit immigration into the United States, as well as upholds the myth that the growth of families in the global South are what is pushing climate change, rather than the consumption and burning of fossil fuels in the global North. So thank you for challenging us to move beyond environmentalism toward environmental justice, and reminding us that if we want to address ecological devastation in a just way, that we must also be working to address poverty, over-policing and hyper-incarceration of communities of color, bloated military budgets, and health disparities, not only in a time of pandemic, but at all times. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I think Sister Bethany is going to be doing closing prayer, no? Yeah, I just got the thumbs up from Lori.
Sorry. Our blessing today comes by way of Hildegard of Bingen. May we awaken from our dullness and rise vigorously towards justice. If we fall in love with creation deeper and deeper, we will respond to its endangerment with passion. As we depart, we thank all of you for joining us today, and we ask that you all unmute and offer peace to one another, and today, by looking each person in the eye and saying, I wish you peace. And as we said yesterday, to see everyone, you may need to swipe the screen from page to page. So unmute now, and I wish you peace.
I wish you
I wish
peace.
you peace.
I wish you peace.
Wish you
Wish you
peace.
peace.
Wish you all
Phyllis,
peace.
peace, Mary Ellen,
Wish you
peace,
peace,
Diane,
Diane.
Sophia,
I wish you
I
have
wish
peace.
peace, Shelley, Mary
Hey,
Ellen,
I wish you
Wish
peace.
peace, Chris, peace, Barbara,
Peace, Maria Elena.
Diane,
Wish you
I wish
peace.
you
peace, Joellen, peace,
Wish you peace.
Diane, I wish you peace. Holly, I remember you. I wish you peace.
Elena.
wish you Marty, peace, Mia, peace, Lori, peace, Anna, peace, Mary Ann, peace, Pat, peace,
Jane
Barbara,
Wilcox, I wish you peace.
peace, Diane, Chris,
Maria Elena, I wish you
Diana,
peace.
peace, Sue,
Wish you peace.
Brianne, I wish you peace.
peace, Ann, Bethany,
Sarah,
peace, Terry,
I
Carmela,
wish you peace.
Carolyn, I wish you peace.
Diane, I wish you peace.
Chris from Concordia, I wish you peace.
Laura,
Peace.
Ashley, Tina,
Mary Ellen, I wish you peace.
Diane.
I wish you peace.
I wish
Marilyn, I wish you peace.
Wish you peace, Cecilia. Wish you
Each peace. Wish you peace.
Wish you peace, Pat.
Wish you peace, Peter. Peter, wish you peace. Larissa,
Wish you peace.
Leanne, Sally, Mary Ellen, I wish you peace.
Wage peace with your breath, Wage healing with your touch, wage compassion with your eyes, wage peace. Wage acceptance with your mind, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage peace. Wage peace with your breath, wage healing with your touch, wage compassion with your eyes, wage peace. Wage acceptance with your mind, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage peace. Wage peace with your breath, wage healing with your touch, wage compassion with your eyes, wage healing with your touch, wage acceptance with your mind, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage healing with your touch, wage compassion with your eyes, wage healing with your touch, wage acceptance with your mind, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage forgiveness with your heart, wage justice with your life, wage peace with your touch, wage passion with your touch, wage passion with your touch, wage acceptance with your mind, wage acceptance with your mind, wage justice with your life, 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 wage peace, wage peace.
Very true.
That's the theme of Reconnect. You know,